Devon has never been short of ghost stories. Across the county, old castles, country inns, lonely bridges, and narrow roads all carry reports of figures that appear and vanish, sounds heard when no one is there, and stories locals have repeated for generations. Some are tied to ruined towers and family tragedies. Others belong to quiet pubs, dark lanes, and places people still pass every day without knowing what has been reported there. Tonight, we begin Haunted Britain Thursdays in Devon, with ghosts of castles, inns, and roads, drawn from some of the county's strangest recorded accounts. Welcome to Haunted Britain Thursdays, where each week we travel through another county, town, village, or forgotten corner of the UK to uncover the ghost stories, folklore, strange reports, and local legends still attached to the places people pass every day. Bury Pomeroy Castle is one of those places that already feels haunted before you hear a single story about it. Hidden in a wooded valley near Tottens, the ruins stand among the trees, with broken walls, empty windows, and old stonework that seems to hold on to every dark tale ever told about the place. And would you believe that one of Devon's most famous ghost stories is said to belong to this castle? The figure is known as the Blue Lady de Pomeroy, and her legend is one of the darkest attached to Bury Pomeroy. According to the old story, she was a member of the de Pomeroy family, and her spirit is said to haunt the ruins after the death of her own child. Some versions of the tale say she killed the child after being assaulted by her father, and that the sound of the child crying or screaming can still sometimes be heard around the castle. It is a grim story, and whether people believe the legend literally or see it as a piece of local folklore, it has helped give the castle its reputation as one of Devon's most unsettling haunted sites. The Blue Lady is not the only presence linked with the ruins. Reports connected with the castle also mention a phantom cavalier and even a ghostly black dog, which gives the place that old British folklore feeling, where one haunting seems to open the door to several others. Could you imagine walking through those ruins late in the day, with the woods closing in around the walls, and then hearing a child crying somewhere inside the stonework? And perhaps that is why Bury Pomeroy Castle carries such an uneasy reputation. It is not just the broken towers or the dark woods around it. It is the thought that somewhere inside those ruins, a grieving figure in blue may still be wandering, while the cry of a child echoes through a place that has never quite let the story rest. Not all of Bury Pomeroy Castle's ghosts are said to wander through the ruins. Some stories lead deeper inside the castle. One of those stories belongs to Margaret Tower. According to the legend, Margaret was part of the de Pomeroy family, but her story is remembered as one of jealousy, betrayal, and a cruel death hidden away from the world. She and her sister were said to have fallen in love with the same man. Instead of the rivalry ending in heartbreak alone, the story claims it ended with Margaret being imprisoned in the dungeon by her own sister and left there to starve. It is a horrible image to sit with. A woman trapped below the castle, with no one coming to help, while life carried on, somewhere above her. Could you imagine being in that situation, hearing the sounds of the household in the distance, knowing the person who put you there was not a stranger, but your own blood? Visitors to Bury Pomeroy Castle have since reported a strange feeling on the stairs near the dungeon. Some say it feels as though someone has brushed past them, even when no one is there. It is not always described as a full apparition, and maybe that makes it more unsettling. Sometimes the most frightening hauntings are not the ones you see clearly. Sometimes it is the light touch, the sudden chill, or the feeling that someone has moved beside you in a place that should be empty. And if the legend is true, Margaret does not need to appear in full. That faint brush on the stairs would be enough, a small reminder of a woman who, according to the old story, was shut away in darkness and never allowed to leave. Leaving the ruins of Bury Pomeroy behind, the story now moves to Bickleigh and to the old bridge over the River Exe. Bridges often gather ghost stories around them, and it is not hard to understand why. They are crossing places, built between one side and another, and in old folklore, places like that often seem to hold on to uneasy memories. The haunting here is linked to a man named Alexander Crewis. According to the story, he murdered a man near this spot, and then threw the body into the river below. The details are grim enough on their own, but what makes the tale linger is what is said to happen afterwards. His shadow is believed to return to the bridge every year, drawn back to the place where the crime was committed. The date attached to the haunting is the 24th of June, making it one of those stories where the ghost is not simply said to wander at random, but to return on a fixed night, almost as though the past is repeating itself. There is something especially unsettling about a ghost tied to an anniversary. It's like the land itself remembers when something terrible happened. Imagine standing near that bridge on a quiet evening, with the river moving underneath, and knowing that according to the old report, a figure connected to murder is said to come back there once a year. The scary part is not just the idea of seeing him, it is the thought of why he returns. Is it guilt? Punishment? A memory that refuses to go away? According to the old report, it is Alexander Cruys himself who is said to return each year to the bridge over the River Exe. The haunting is tied to the place where he murdered a man and threw the body into the water below. For Bickleigh, the bridge over the River Exe is not only a crossing point. In this account, it becomes a place where crime, death, and folklore meet, and where Alexander Cruys is said to return, year after year, to the river that once hid his victim. Staying in Bickleigh, one of those stories is attached to the Fisherman's Cot public house, a riverside inn with the kind of setting that already feels made for old local tales. Close to the River Exe, surrounded by trees, stone, and water, it is easy to imagine stories being passed across the bar late at night, especially when the building itself is linked to a strange and gentle haunting. The report connected to Fisherman's Cot describes the sound of a woman laughing inside the bar, a soft laughter, heard when no visible woman is there, but becomes unsettling the moment people realise it has no clear source. The curious thing about this story is that the laughter is said to be separate from another local haunting reported outside the building, a headless horseman connected with the area. That means the Fisherman's Cot has more than one strange tale attached to it. Could you imagine sitting there near closing time, the bar growing quiet, the last few voices fading away, and then hearing a woman laugh softly from somewhere nearby? You look around, expecting to see someone standing by a table or near the door, but there is no one there. Just the room, the river outside, and the uneasy feeling that something from the past has joined the evening for a moment. Still in Bickleigh, another unusual report comes from the Trout Inn, but this one moves away from rivers, roads, and outside apparitions. It is a much more domestic kind of haunting, set inside the building itself. The account dates to 1989, when a former owner reportedly saw the figure of a chef inside the kitchen. According to the report, the apparition appeared to come out of a kitchen cupboard, then stood beside a side unit before fading from view. It was a brief encounter, but the details are oddly specific, which makes the story stand out from the usual shadow at the doorway type of haunting. There is something quietly strange about a ghost being seen in a working kitchen. Kitchens are practical places. People go there to cook, clean, prepare food, and get on with the day. So when a figure appears there with no explanation, it feels less like a grand ghost story and more like a moment where the past has slipped into ordinary life. The report does not say that the chef spoke, tried to frighten anyone, or caused any disturbance. He simply appeared, stood for a moment, and vanished. For the Trout Inn, the haunting is not built around tragedy or legend. It is built around one brief sighting in a familiar room, a former owner, a kitchen cupboard, and the figure of a chef who seemed to step back into the place for just a few seconds before disappearing again. From the old inns and castle ruins, the trail through Devon moves to Bovey Tracey and to Bovey Heathfield Local Nature Reserve. Today it is a quiet place of open heathland, paths, trees and wildlife, the kind of setting people visit for fresh air rather than ghost stories. But attached to this landscape is a report that reaches back to the violence of the English Civil War. In 1646, Bovey Heathfield was connected with fighting during the Civil War, and according to local paranormal tradition, echoes of that conflict are still sometimes said to return. The account describes both sights and sounds of battle being experienced in the area, as though a violent moment from the past is briefly replaying across the land. Battlefield hauntings often have a different feeling from house ghosts or pub spirits. They are not always tied to one figure or one tragic name. Instead, they seem to belong to the ground itself. A place where fear, noise, confusion, and death once filled the air can gather a heavy reputation over time, especially when later visitors claim to hear sounds that do not fit the peaceful scene around them. At Bovey Heathfield, the idea is simple but powerful. A quiet nature reserve by day, but a place where the past is said to break through in flashes. No named ghost steps forward in this account. No single figure explains the haunting. What remains is the suggestion of a battle that never fully faded, the sound of conflict carried across the heath long after the soldiers themselves were gone. For Devon, it reminds us that hauntings are not always found behind locked doors or inside ruined towers. Sometimes they are attached to open land, where people walk through a peaceful landscape without realizing that, according to local reports, another version of that same place may still be remembered beneath their feet. Still in Bovey Tracey, the next report takes us from open heathland into the more enclosed world of an old inn. The Riverside Inn, sadly like many pubs, it closed in June 2016, had a very different kind of haunting attached to it. The report is built around something that can be even harder to ignore: smell. In the late 1990s, guests staying at the Riverside Inn were reportedly woken by an overwhelming smell of smoke. It was strong enough to disturb them from sleep, but when the source was checked, nothing obvious could be found. There was no fire, no visible sign of burning, and no clear explanation for where the smell had come from. That kind of report has a very grounded feel to it. A person can dismiss a shadow as poor light, or a noise as pipes, wind, or floorboards. But waking in the night, because the room smells of smoke, is different. It creates an immediate sense of danger. Most people would not lie there wondering whether it was paranormal. They would get up, check the room, listen for movement, and look for the source before the fear could settle. The next story takes us to Branscombe, one of Devon's old coastal villages, and to a place known as Margell's Cottage. Compared with the grander castle stories or the haunted inns, this account feels smaller and stranger, almost like a collection of things that should not quite belong together. The most visible report is of a man with a bandaged head, seen only once. The account does not give him a long backstory or a clear identity, which leaves the image hanging there on its own. A wounded-looking figure appearing briefly inside or near the cottage, then becoming part of the building's haunted reputation. But the stronger part of the Margell's Cottage story is not the single sighting. It is the sounds said to have been heard there over time. Reports connected with the cottage include monk-like plain chant, unexplained rapping, and even the sound of phantom snoring. That last detail gives the haunting an odd, almost uncomfortable realism. The plain chant gives the story its older feeling. You can picture a quiet cottage at night, the rooms still, and then a low religious chant drifting through the building with no one there to sing it. The rapping sounds make it feel more physical, as though something is trying to be noticed, and the snoring is stranger still, because it suggests a presence not performing for anyone, but simply remaining. Margell's Cottage is one of those reports that does not explain itself neatly. A bandaged man seen once, then years of sounds that point in different directions. Maybe that is why it feels so peculiar. It does not give us a single ghost story with a beginning, middle, and end. It gives us a cottage where, according to the reports, something unseen may have settled in and made itself quietly known. From Branscombe, the trail moves to Brendon and to the Stag Hunters Inn, a place with one of the more recognisable figures in this part of Devon. The haunting here is linked to what witnesses described as a white female form, seen in a way that left little room for an easy explanation. According to the report, 2 witnesses saw a smoky white figure of a woman pass through the walls of the inn. That detail is what gives the story its force. It was not just a pale shape glimpsed at a distance, or a shadow half noticed in poor light. The figure was seen clearly enough to be described, and its movement through the building made it seem separate from anything living. There was also another report from a delivery person who claimed to have seen the same white figure outside the inn. That gives the haunting a wider reach. It suggests the apparition was not only tied to one room or one moment indoors, but was seen in more than one setting around the property. At the Stag Hunters Inn, the haunting is not built around noise or suggestion. It rests on the site of a woman-shaped presence, seen more than once, and remembered because she seemed to move through the place as though she had never really left it. The next Devon story takes us to Bridestowe and to the Royal Oak Public House, where the haunting is not centred on something inside the building, but just outside it. This is one of those older-style ghost stories where the road, the inn, and the sound of something approaching all become part of the same account. The figure linked to the story is Lady Howard, whose phantom coach is said to be occasionally seen or heard near the pub. People are said to become aware of the coach itself, either by sight or by sound, as though an old carriage is passing through the area long after it should have disappeared from the roads. Stories of phantom coaches have a very old feel to them. They belong to a time when roads were darker, travel was slower, and the arrival of a carriage outside an inn meant someone had come from another place. Lady Howard's coach gives this part of the Devon journey a very traditional ghost road feeling. No dramatic apparition is needed, just an old inn, a road nearby, and the belief that every so often a coach connected to Lady Howard still passes through Bridestowe, as though travelling on a route it has never stopped following. We stay in Bridestowe, and the story attached to the Bearslake Inn is one of those Devon hauntings that feels more sorrowful than frightening. The figure at the centre of it is known as Mary, believed to have been the daughter of a former owner of the inn. According to the account, she died after falling down the stairs, and ever since, her crying has been said to linger inside the building. It gives the inn a sadder kind of haunting, centred on the sound of grief attached to the place where her life ended. Staircases in old inns are passed every day without much thought, but when one becomes linked with a death, it changes the way the whole building feels. At Bearslake, the haunting rests on one simple report: a young woman connected to the inn, a fatal fall, and the sound of crying that some say still remains. Also in Bridestowe, another report is attached to Great Bickleigh Manor House. This one is quieter than the story of Mary at the Bearslake Inn, but it has the feel of an older house where small signs are noticed over time. The haunting is linked to a female form, though she is said to be seen only rarely. The stronger reports are of footsteps heard inside the manor, with no visible person to account for them. It gives the story a simple but uneasy feeling, someone moving through the building, but never quite appearing when expected. Old manor houses often carry their history in layers. Rooms are changed, families come and go, and yet certain sounds can make a place feel occupied in a way that is hard to explain. At Great Bickleigh, the footsteps are the detail that seems to have lasted. They suggest movement, routine, and a presence still crossing the same parts of the house. The female figure may be rare, but the footsteps keep the story alive. They turn the manor from a historic building into a place where the past is said to still make itself heard, one step at a time. The next report brings the Devon journey into much more recent territory, away from old castles and manor houses and onto the A377, between Copplestone and Morcard Bishop. On the 22nd of September 2022, at around 5:30 in the evening, two witnesses were travelling along this stretch of road when they reportedly heard a motorbike coming up behind them. The sound grew closer, then seemed to overtake their car and accelerate away ahead of them. But when they looked, there was no motorbike there, no rider, no vehicle, only the sound of one passing by. That is what makes this account stand out from the older Devon legends. It is not attached to a ruined tower or a centuries-old family story. It is modern, specific, and ordinary in its setting. A car on a road, two witnesses, and a sound both of them believed was real enough to react to. Road hauntings have a different kind of unease because they happen during movement. There is no chance to stop and study the moment properly. By the time the mind tries to make sense of it, the car has moved on, the road has changed, and the sound has already gone. Between Copplestone and Morcard Bishop, the report leaves behind a simple question. What did the witnesses hear that evening? A motorbike seemed to approach, pass, and vanish into the road ahead, but according to the account, nothing visible was ever there. The next stop is Abbotsham, and the story attached to the thatched inn is simple, but it has the kind of detail that suits an old pub haunting very well. According to the report, phantom footsteps have been heard inside the building. But the more distinctive part of the account is the sound of glasses clinking in an empty room. It is a small detail, yet it immediately gives the haunting a lived-in feeling, as though someone unseen is still moving through the inn after everyone else has gone. There is something very British about a haunted inn where the ghost is not seen but heard through the ordinary sounds of the place. Footsteps on the floor, glasses touched together, a room that should be quiet but somehow is not. At the thatched inn, the report does not need a long legend behind it. The atmosphere comes from the setting itself, an old public house, an empty room, and the sound of activity where no one appears to be present. For anyone hearing it, the question would be, who or what was still inside the room? The next report takes us to Abbotskerswell, around the area of St. Augustine's Priory. This is one of those Devon hauntings where the setting does a lot of the work. A priory, old roads, and reports of religious figures seen long after they should have disappeared from the landscape. In the 1890s, a monk was said to haunt the local roads around St. Augustine's Priory. He was described as a fading figure, which gives the account a quiet, half-seen quality, as though he was never fully present in the first place. Rather than belonging to one room or one building, this haunting seems to have attached itself to the roads nearby. The same area also has a much more recent report. In 2015, a phantom nun was said to have been seen nearby, adding another religious figure to the local tradition. The two reports are separated by more than a century, but they give Abbotskerswell a very particular kind of atmosphere. The next story takes us to Alwington and to Portledge Manor, where the haunting is less about a figure being seen and more about a warning being heard. The account is connected to the Pinecoffin family, and it centres on a church bell that was said to ring at midnight before a death in the family. In 1868, the bell allegedly sounded at that hour, and the death it foretold was later said to have happened in India at the same time. That gives this report a very different feeling from the inn and road hauntings. The bell was not simply heard as an unexplained sound. It was understood as an omen, a warning that death had already crossed the family's path, even from thousands of miles away. Stories like this belong to an older kind of haunting, where certain families, houses, and names become tied to signs that appear before tragedy. At Portledge Manor, the sound of the bell carries the whole account. Midnight arrives, the bell rings, and somewhere far away, a death is said to have taken place at that same moment. The story leaves Portledge Manor with a cold and solemn reputation. No ghost has to appear at the window. No footsteps have to cross the floor. All it takes is the sound of a bell in the dark, heard at the wrong hour, and understood too late as a warning. The next story takes us to Ashburton and to the Bay Horse public house, where the haunting is linked to the sounds of children inside the building. According to the report, a crying child has been heard in the upper part of the Bay Horse. Alongside that, people have also reported the sound of children running, giving the impression of movement somewhere above, even when no children are there to explain it. It is a simple account, but it has an uncomfortable edge because the sounds are so familiar. A child crying in another part of a building would normally make someone stop and listen. Footsteps running overhead would usually be easy to place. At the Bay Horse, those ordinary sounds become strange because they are heard where they should not be. Old inns can carry noise in odd ways, especially through upper floors, stairwells, and older timber. But reports like this are remembered because they leave people uncertain about what they heard. Was it the building shifting sound from somewhere else, or was it something connected to the inn's past? At the Bay Horse, the haunting is not built around a figure with a name or a long legend. It rests on the sound of a child crying upstairs, followed by the impression of children running through the building. Small details, but in an old pub after hours, they would be enough to change the feeling of the place completely. The next story takes us to Ashprington and to the Waterman's Arms public house, where the haunting is linked to a young girl named Emily. According to the account, Emily was hit by a cart outside the pub. After her death, she became connected with the building's ghost stories, and her presence is still remembered as part of the inn's local reputation. The same report also mentions another figure, a grey-haired former landlady, giving the Waterman's Arms more than one spirit attached to its history. Emily's story has the sadness of an accident that happened in an everyday place. A road outside a public house, the passing of a cart, and a young life ended close to the building. It is the kind of account that makes a location feel changed by one moment, especially when the name of the person involved continues to be repeated long afterwards. The next report takes us to Ashwater and to what was the Manor Inn, where the haunting is tied to one of the most familiar features of an old public house, the fireplace. Sadly, this pub closed in 1989 after a fire and was demolished. According to the account, a strange figure has been seen within the embers of the fire. The report describes it as a hot shade, which gives this story a very different feeling from the others in Devon. Instead of a ghost crossing a room or being heard upstairs, this presence is connected directly with the glow of the fire itself. It is an unusual image, someone looking into the fireplace, watching the coals shift and burn, then becoming aware of something human-like inside the heat and light. Fire already plays tricks on the eye, especially in a dim room, but this report became part of the inn's haunted tradition because the figure was remembered as more than a passing shape in the flames. The next story takes us to Aveton Gifford and to South Efford House, where the haunting is not linked to one figure alone. The report speaks of 3 shades connected with the property, each with a very different character. The most disturbing of them is said to be a servant, seen hanging over a staircase. It is a grim image made stronger by the setting. Staircases already carry a strange feeling in old houses, especially when they are quiet, narrow, or dimly lit. In this account, the staircase becomes the centre of something far darker, a figure suspended where people would normally pass from one floor to another. The other reported spirits give South Efford House an even more unusual reputation. One is described as a swearing naval officer, which adds a rougher and more human edge to the haunting. The other is said to be a ferryman, a figure that feels tied to movement, crossing, and the old working life of the area. Taken together, these reports make South Efford House feel less like a place with a single ghost story, and more like a house carrying several traces of the past. A servant at the staircase, a naval officer remembered through anger or bad language, and a ferryman whose presence suggests old roots and old duties still lingering around the property. The next story takes us to Axminster and to Chute Barton, a manor house with a ghost said to be tied to the violence and divided loyalties of the Civil War period. The figure linked to the house is Lady de la Pole. According to the account, she was hanged for being a royalist, and her ghost is now said to walk the grounds of Chute Barton. It is a brief report, but it carries a strong historical weight. A woman associated with one side of a dangerous conflict, punished for that loyalty, and later remembered as a presence still moving through the estate. There is also a second strange detail attached to the location. A phantom feline has reportedly been seen there too, said to move through solid objects. That gives the haunting a slightly different edge. Lady de la Pole belongs to the human history of the manor, but the ghostly cat adds something older and more folkloric, as if the house has gathered more than one kind of strange report over time. The final story in this first Devon journey takes us to Barnstaple and to a cinema with a ghost known as Fred. According to the report, Fred is thought to have been a worker who died in 1931 after falling from the roof during repairs. His spirit later became linked with the cinema, giving the building a haunting rooted not in legend or distant folklore, but in a workplace accident remembered by name. There is something very grounded about this account. A cinema is a place people visit for entertainment, noise, and escape. But behind that public life, there is also the hidden work of keeping the building standing. Fred's story belongs to that unseen side of the place, the repairs, the roof, the danger, and the accident that ended his life. As a final story for this episode, the cinema brings the journey into a more modern setting. We began with ruined castles and old family legends, passed through inns, roads, battlefields, manors, and priory lanes, and now end inside a place built for audiences and stories. Perhaps that makes Fred's haunting feel strangely fitting. In a building where people came to watch shadows move across a screen, one shadow of the past is said to have remained behind. And that brings our first journey through haunted Devon to an end. Tonight, we have travelled from ruined castles and old manor houses to haunted inns, lonely roads, battlefield echoes, and one very unusual cinema ghost. But this is only the beginning. Devon has hundreds of recorded ghost stories, strange reports, pieces of folklore, and local legends still waiting to be explored. Next time on Haunted Britain Thursdays, we return with another chapter in our Haunted Britain series. Until then, keep an eye on the old roads, the quiet rooms, and the places people pass every day, because in Britain, the past does not always stay where it belongs.